know if we can hear each other. I don't know if I have.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Pat? I think so, all right. Yeah.
Here's the problem. I don't know how to adjust it.
Right. There should be a settings button.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me look here.
So like this here at the bottom of your screen where it says speaker, that usually can be increased. Open volume mixer, and you can put that way up.
I drive myself crazy with this stuff.
Well, it's not always simple. Let's put it that way. Gonna minimize a few things here to increase the quality.
Colette?
Yeah.
Oh,
okay, good.
I can definitely hear
Sorry
you.
about that.
No problem. I can definitely hear you. Well, actually.
Good. You know, I always keep the sound turned off on all my computers, and usually whenever I do these meetings like this, we always have to do both call and visual. So I didn't think of that, so I had everything up, and I can't get to on the bottom of the screen wherever it is to do it. So sorry about that. I'm technically challenged, apparently.
That's all right, no worries. How you doing?
I'm doing really well.
How about you?
Good.
How about you?
Good. It's the end of the semester, so we're wrapping up a number of projects, and it'll be a little bit better next week in terms of, you know, it gets hectic towards the end, so we just we hang in there, and then it calms down. I really do.
Good.
I do appreciate you taking the time, and it's fortuitous because I had conversations with Laura out at the Transformation Project in Nebraska yesterday, and with Reggie, and then earlier today we were online with Brenda McGowan. So
Okay.
there's a number of things potentially, Pat, that could come together, and one of them I think would be something that your expertise would be most helpful with. And that is this. Let me pull up what Laura shared with us, which essentially about the transformation project out at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. She sent us a number of these documents, which we've since accessed and included in our peer-to-peer partner category on our StoryMap journal. And essentially, the way Laura explained it, there was a donor out in Nebraska who is very interested in the life of Malcolm X. And essentially, he gave a grant for educational materials to be created that reference the life of Malcolm X. And it's a whole program out there, Pat, for men in solitary, whereby they can take courses and they can access these educational materials. And it's a program that relies quite a bit, as Laura explained, on motivational interviewing. So they're gathering quite a lot of statistics on the basis of the participation of the male population at a specific facility in Nebraska. Now, they don't have much assistance in terms of social media or website, so they haven't really been able to communicate too much about what they've been doing outside of that Nebraska system. That being said, what Laura explained, some of the challenges funding-wise and in terms of you need a lot of staff to implement this type of program. She said they'd like to try it in a women's facility, but the difficulty is that in Nebraska, they don't have a facility where the women are there in solitary for a long enough period of time. So my sense is that Laura would like to be in touch with a few colleagues. I give her some suggestions as to a particular facility out of state where they could possibly launch a pilot. Now, the way Reggie explained it to me, I think that makes a lot of sense, possibly to discuss this with you. Brenda was very intrigued by Laura's idea for a pilot youth project because I think Brenda is doing a lot of work with youth. My understanding, the area that she covers, including New York, so she's going to come visit us in the spring, including Rikers, which of course is a jail. However, nonetheless, we're thinking possibly of partnering with Brenda for one of the projects that she has at Rikers involving youth, and then putting Brenda in touch with Laura about a youth pilot. Whereas the pilot for possibly a female facility, that was something where I would ask if you have any ideas or perhaps could share maybe some ideas with Laura as we think this through. Because I'm pretty sure that they won't be able to stay in Nebraska to do this. My understanding is they'll need to move out. And the question is where and how. And whatever way NYU could be helpful, I mean, we're happy to provide the social media interns. We're happy to provide any type of assistance that can be provided by distance. If there's something that happens in New York, we're happy to put the P2P team at the service of that. So our goal is to be more facilitators, to learn from those who have the experience and the knowledge in this area. I just think that because our campaign is so focused on disengagement, what Laura had to say about Life of Malcolm X, about what can be learned from the experiences, was very interesting. And we'd like very much to stay in touch and follow up with her, because I think it's potentially a model what they're developing out there, provided we can explain why they've chosen to focus on the life of Malcolm X, what their expectations are, what some of the evidence-based findings have been. Those would be the types of, shall we say, benchmarks that we would really need to reference. And then think, well, what could we contribute? Maybe we could contribute something on data visualization. We're happy to be helpful where that's useful.
Okay. Have you looked at New York State in terms of a women's pilot?
I haven't, because I wanted to talk with you first, and I wanted to put you in touch directly with Laura. We are anchored in New York because of the university. However, next spring,
Right.
fourth time that NYU participates in peer-to-peer. And at this point, while we can retain our focus on New York with Enza Academy, which I'll talk about in a little while, we also see the need for more national outreach and possibly also then a scale up more internationally. The time has come. We want to definitely keep our New York anchor, but that doesn't mean that we don't look outside as well. Here's Camilo Lopez Delgado, Patricia. He's going to introduce himself to you. He's a member of our P2P team, currently interning at the United Nations. And he'll say a few words about himself, and then perhaps you could say a few words about yourself as well. Camilo, please, welcome.
Hi, and sorry for being late. Well, my name's Camilo. I am a student at the International Relations Master's Program at NYU. I'm originally from Paraguay, and I'm currently interning with the Permanent Mission of Paraguay, working mostly with the second committee that deals with development and economic issues.
Okay.
Camilo also filmed for P2P an introduction to the campaign in Italian, which is presently circulating on social media. We have about 10 introductions in as many languages to try to reach out to others in different parts of the world, talk to them a little bit about what we're doing, and of course the emphasis on working with those of you who are experts in prison reform is mentioned. We had a film screening of Imperium, Pat, last week with Michael German that was also filmed, the discussion. And then we also had an interactive panel last Friday with a former member of the State Department and another member at the United Nations University, talking a little bit about disengagement, de-radicalization, how we define these terms, what they mean, how our work could be relevant through talking about personal stories. It was, I think, very enlightening. And again, all of these things have been filmed. We're making shorter clips, and we'll make them available as video resources for different individuals who could be interested. Brenda talked quite a bit about her work with Prison Fellowship. Maybe you could talk something about your background, your work with Warden Exchange in particular, what we did in Minneapolis, perhaps. That I think would be fascinating for Camilo and for me.
Okay. First, Camilo, parli italiano?
Sì, lo parlo, scusa.
My husband, mi sposo, is an immigrant from Italy. He was born there.
Oh, really? What part?
And actually speaks.
He was born
in Aiello, in Calabria, Reggio Calabria.
Ah, nice.
Immigrated to
Canada when he was about 11,
and then to the
United States when we were married 40 years ago.
Ah, bello.
And then
you are from Paraguay.
Yes, I'm from Paraguay, but my dad's side of the family is Italian. I'm also an Italian citizen.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Both, basically.
I moved to Michigan
from Panama.
Oh, really?
We got a lot of
connections here.
Pat, could you mute perhaps the speaker on the phone, or maybe mute? In other words, we've got a feedback loop, so
I'm getting feedback too.
Yes,
you know what? Let me mute this one. Let me try this.
See if this helps.
We should still be able to hear you if you mute only one.
Is that better?
Yeah, much.
Okay. So, I live in Michigan. No, I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan up on Lake Superior. I've been in the corrections field for about 30 years now, starting back in the 80s, where I worked in one of our facilities here, eventually became the warden of that prison, a big men's prison, and I was the warden there for more than 9 years. Went on to be a regional administrator, a deputy director, and then I was the director of the Michigan Department of Corrections when Governor Jennifer Granholm was our governor, and I did that for almost 8 years, almost 2 full terms, and left when she was term limited out the end of 2010. Now I do a lot of things around the country in corrections leadership, things that from a practitioner's side of view. I met Colette specifically a couple months ago in Minneapolis. One of the programs I do, I'm on the advisory board of Prison Fellowship Ministries Warden Exchange Program. And our goal is one of transformative leadership. And our belief is that if we can reach out to the leaders of our correctional facilities and transform how we run those prisons, that we will change how people both do their time and how they come out of prison. And that a humane system is a safer system for those who live and work inside of them and for our communities. So that is what we have been focusing on for several years now. We run a program each year. We'll have about a couple dozen wardens and deputy wardens from around the country, usually from a dozen states, who spend close to a year together in different, both on-site together and then through weekly web meetings that we do, working on transformative leadership. And we were closing out one of our programs in Minneapolis, and that's when I crossed paths with Colette. So that's kind of a brief version of that stuff.
Pat, have you heard of the Transformation Project in any capacity? I know there are several because Reggie mentioned at least 3 or 4. Are you familiar with the Transformation Project in any capacity, even if it's not the Nebraska one?
I am not.
Okay. All right. Then I think that perhaps the way we might approach this is the following. Brenda explained a little bit of her background getting involved in prison fellowship and actually has initiated a number of programs for the youth. Now, would you say that initiatives you're involved in now, are they more for women, or is it across the board in terms of the work you're doing presently?
They're primarily focused on adults, not broken down by gender. We do always have wardens from both male and female facilities. In any state system, women tend to represent about 5% of the incarcerated population. So, you know, it's not going to be focused primarily on women because they're a very small percentage.
Right, right. And when you think of facilities, for example, where it might be possible to implement a project like the one that's out in Nebraska, again, the challenge there was because the women's population is much smaller. And I'm not sure, I mean, is this going to be a population where there are less serving life terms, where there are less serving longer terms? I mean, that seemed to be the challenge that Laura brought up.
Yes, it is going to be. I mean, the path to prison for women is very different than the path for men in all aspects of that, from sentencing, I mean, all kinds of things. One of the things you mentioned was that the women did not spend long periods of time in administrative segregation. And so there wasn't the same, you referred to it as solitary. We don't use that word on my side of, in fact, I instruct everyone in the programs I do to never say solitary. That's for the media to mischaracterize what we do. But having said that, restrictive housing, we tend to say now, or administrative segregation, you will not find large numbers of women typically or for long periods of time, as much as anything for the reasons why people end up in segregation, which tend to be management issues, and women don't tend to behave in such a way that requires them to be segregated from everybody for long periods of time.
Okay.
And so depending on the system, you won't find, it's going to be harder to find. You will find women doing life, varieties of reasons, obviously, but you just won't see the numbers that you see with men, of women doing long sentences and particularly life sentences. You will find some, but not large numbers. So if you're in a small state and you're looking at that 5% or less of women, and then the small percentage doing life, you may not need one hand to count how many in the whole system.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. The other thing that we talked a little bit about with Brenda was this idea of the real vulnerability that's experienced inside, particularly if we're talking about restrictive housing. And the fact that in some cases, the values that are actually imparted are values if these are persons who have sought refuge in gangs, if these are persons who fear, shall we say, for either their physical safety, who feel particularly vulnerable, and who in some ways are looking for a sense of belonging in either gangs or in other types of groups. This becomes a question of, with whom do I share my values? How is my identity being shaped? And the younger the person, one would think the greater the need for a sense of belonging, the greater the desire for recognition by one's peers. So there's a tremendous, shall we say, impetus, particularly among youth, to feel part of a particular community. For adults, I would imagine this is a bit different because the needs as one gets older also evolve and change. Do we see any differences, do you think, that gender-wise, in terms of what is happening, the experience of these women, either, if we have any references to younger women, or just the general women's population of a certain age? Are there differences that one could identify by gender in the experience?
Well, I will tell you, I think that regardless of gender, people tend to find a way to do their time. And you're right that age is significant, and especially if you're a juvenile in an adult system, you are going to be that much more vulnerable and pressured to identify with somebody and find, it takes a while for people to get on their feet, depending on their background, and determine what their prison identity is going to be. In the women's facilities, you tend to see some differences as compared to the males, and some of it is just women conduct themselves differently. They manipulate the system in a different way. The women have a strong tendency to create families within, I'm sure you've heard this, inside of the prisons, and so you have a lot of that going on. You do have gang activity. It's different. I mean, it just is different than with the men. I have never run a women's facility. I was only a warden at men's prisons, so my women's experience, I mean, I ran the whole Department of Corrections in Michigan, but I'm a few layers separated from on the front line running the women's prisons. But my sense is that, certainly in Michigan, it's a much lower level of that type of pressure to belong. There's certainly pressure for different things. And, this could be different by state, too, because you have different cultures in different states, and you're going to see different, prisons tend to reflect communities. If you're at an urban prison that represents an urban community, you certainly may see some different pressures than in other places. In Michigan, we only have one women's prison. So every woman in the state of Michigan is in the same location. So that's very different. And that goes back to those small numbers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's very context specific by state. All right.
Yes. But their needs are so different. The women's needs are extremely different.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the issue of children and all of these things, you know, male incarcerated, something like 90% their kids are being watched by the other parent. For women, it's just the opposite. It's, you know, aunt, it's grandma, it's foster care system.
Mm-hmm. One moment, Pat, please.
Okay.
What is it? Well, I'm in the middle of a conference, so I'm sorry. I'm in the middle of a conference.
Okay, would you come to move? He's in my driveway. I can't pull in. He can't pull in the driveway. He does this all the time. You got a driveway, I want you park there.
So how long have you been working in this area, Pat?
What's that, Camilo?
How long have you been working in the field in general with the jails or the prison system? In the prison system.
I'm sorry, I still missed that. I've got.
Yeah, sorry.
How long have I been working
in the prison system?
Okay. I started working with the Michigan Department of Corrections in 1988. So that puts us at almost 30 years.
Mm-hmm. And during the time, do you interact much with like some kind of like foreign institutions, or it's mostly just within the U.S.?
Mostly within the U.S. I mean, occasionally, even as a warden, I had some foreign prisoners, and there were times I dealt with people from different embassies. Certainly as a director a little more often, but it's still rare.
Uh-huh.
You know, and that may be true in other states. You may have a much larger population of foreign prisoners. In Michigan, it's not a significant number.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so let's come back a little bit if we can, Pat. I mean, in your experience, we talked a little bit about this when we were out in Minneapolis, and actually a colleague of ours shared this particular article. I don't know if you can see this.
Something just came up.
Yeah. Sentences in Minnesota, ISIS case,
Yep.
run from time served to 35 years. We were talking a little bit about this in terms of this particular program, de-radicalization program. Do you see this as becoming more and more necessary, Pat, that judges have staggered sentences in these cases where we're really talking about cases related to ISIS, violence related to other types of groups that are definitely more international?
In general, I feel that judicial discretion is a good thing. That, you know, and you look at the whole issue with mandatory minimums, that sort of thing. That judges ought to be able to look at the entirety of the facts of a case and circumstances and of the defendant in determining the best response. I don't have any current experience dealing with something exactly like this in terms of, you know, those seduced by ISIS, et cetera. But I would still think, I mean, you've got to have some kind of a range, but I think judicial discretion tends to work well. You're always going to have the example where it was abused and the one judge who maybe shouldn't have been allowed discretion. But in general, I think it has more impact than just that across the board, treat everybody the same. Most of us don't respond well to that.
Okay, so in this respect, this type of, shall we say, case is one that perhaps might be indicative of what we could be seeing looking ahead in terms of needing a certain flexibility or needing to consider a certain range, shall we say, of sentences.
Right.
Okay, right. That's then. I mean, because we want to reference and at least be aware of a number of these cases, and our colleague, who is again formerly of the State Department, brought this to my attention. Since we were out in Minnesota, and since this came up, because I gather that the Twin Cities have largest Somali population, this is something that is going to be important to keep focused on. I mean, we had talked about this a little bit in Minneapolis. We did the film screening of Imperium, and that was focused very much on infiltration of white supremacist group. What we've been asked to do is to try to connect the dots in recruitment of the vulnerable, whether it would be by gangs, whether it would be by white supremacists, whether it would be by ISIS, and try to find some connectors. Now, the vulnerability is there. Question is one of access. It's been explained to us that usually this type of recruitment is happening in a very personal way. So in other words, the idea of online recruitment in a mass sense, so the masses, is not as accurate as actually, shall we say, recruitment one-on-one or recruitment in more intimate groups. I think that this came across in the film we watched as well. These tend to be community gatherings, not kind of anonymous, getting to know each other. They're kind of almost in communities, in neighborhoods. And it seemed to be very important to empathize. In other words, to try to understand what the other person is going through. That's what this FBI agent in the film was asked by his supervisor to do. To empathize with the group he became involved with, try to really understand what was motivating them. Why were they doing this? And I think that's a lesson that we are learning in terms of trying to be sensitive to why these types of actions take place. I mean, what motivates a young person or even an older person to engage in these types of activities? I mean, why? Why the resort to more extremist violence? Do you think that the empathy piece...
And you know, I think it's particularly true the younger the person is.
Mm-hmm.
They're more subject to that type of, you know, young people. I mean, some of this goes back to just whole brain development. And one of the things I do in my current life is I have a couple of cases I'm an expert witness on. And one case I'm an expert on is the juvenile lifer case in Michigan, which is different than what you're doing. But part of the arguments are young people make bad decisions. And they don't do a good job of processing information and thinking of consequences. And so, and in just what I'm looking at on the screen here for this guy in the sentencing, you know, where the judge is talking about not wanting to lose the opportunity, however small, to help this kid. There's a lot of truth to that with young people, and depending what they've been exposed to up to that point of time, this may just be normal for them. I mean, we don't know. I mean, as a warden, I saw people who almost had zero chance of not ending up in prison, given the dysfunctional life they had leading up to when they started committing crime. It was expected they would end up there.
Mm-hmm.
And so with younger people, it's a more significant issue. Not that it isn't for older, but sometimes people are more set in their ways and beliefs when they're older, where younger people, there's an opportunity to look through a different filter, if you will.
Mm-hmm. This came up in trying to understand the difference between disengagement and de-radicalization. I mean, with disengagement, it's really about turning away from the violence and finding another way to express oneself. Whereas the de-radicalization, what was emphasized is this is really asking a person to give up values. It's really asking a person to, shall we say, step away from a belief system.
Right.
And if that belief system is something which is very, very closely connected to the person's identity, particularly for an older person, I would imagine that that would be a more difficult series of steps, because it's quite different to renounce or reject one's whole value system and to turn to something different.
During the time when I was a warden, we had a number of strategic threat groups, STGs, gangs, who we went after very overtly. And I had one of them, in fact, the last straw for them was a disturbance that occurred at my place. And so we dealt directly with people to renounce this gang affiliation. In most cases, these people were not affiliated with this before they came to prison. But that became who they were in prison. And if there was a hit called, you know, in the case of my prison, I had some staff who were assaulted because had been called. They were going to do it because they were more concerned and more identified more with their gang members and believed in the goals and priorities of the gang. That had become what superseded any other belief they had. So you are right. It is very difficult to break that. And the longer and more time someone has into having believed that, the harder it is. I mean, put us in the other, I mean, whatever our religious beliefs are or cultural tradition, if someone came and told us the exact opposite of that and tried to get us to accept it, and we've spent 40, 50 years believing it, they're not going to get very far with us.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely spot on in terms of the correlation with the length of time the person is actually been engaged with any particular group. It becomes, I believe, harder and harder to renounce unless there is, some, I would imagine, some really dramatic incident which makes the person completely reconsider what's been adopted in terms of values. So something really transformational, which, I mean, leads me to the next question I would have, and I think Camilo might share this. Have you seen any initiatives that really have been so transformational that you've seen this type of real change in persons who've been serving quite a long time? So in other words, we're talking now people who've really been thoroughly, shall we say, socialized into the prison culture. Have there been programs of deep impact? I guess that's what I would ask.
You know, when I was a warden, we had a program, and it had started in other prisons. We didn't start it at my place. But it was a program that was based on the men's Catholic Curcio movement outside of prison. And it goes by a couple of names, but its goal was to deal with people, and it was far less about reentry than it was about getting people to accept their life and do good time and do positive, productive time. It was a Catholic-based program, but they accepted people of any faith or no faith, though they had to realize there was going to be some of that they would hear, but, I mean, wasn't a requirement. It was, in my experience, pretty successful. I was a warden at a prison in a lot of trouble. I mean, you may have heard me say this. It was tinderbox when I became the warden there. And this was helpful in getting us to settle it down because it got people to look at doing their time differently and more productively and positively. And so that was a program at the time that, and I remember they changed their name. It was Kairos and Kyrex with a K in both cases. That was, I don't know where that program is these days, but there are similar programs and offered by different faiths like that have reached into prisons. Certainly Prison Fellowship, the program I'm involved in, I mean, they have some things they're doing. I'm on the staff side, the Warden Exchange, but there are other things going on with Prison Fellowship. And the goal is to get people to accept this as their life and have you be more productive. And there certainly are many, many examples of incarcerated persons who have made that change. It is not easy. And in some cases, depending on who they have chosen to identify with, I mean, that could be a life-threatening change for them.
Yeah.
I mean, they may be physically afraid to denounce because they know what one likely outcome is if they do that. And that's factual. That can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that any type of renunciation carries certain risks with it. Whether you're talking about renouncing your, shall we say, allegiance to a gang, whether you're talking about leaving a group like ISIS, and we've certainly seen a few cases that have been written up in the literature about what that type of renunciation entails and the risks that would be involved. So it's certainly an act of courage, I think, to renounce in that way.
Yes, it is.
And it's also an act of courage to be a model, a role model for others who might be looking to see an example of someone who actually has had that courage to act in that way. So I think these are the types of stories that we believe it's helpful to first to understand and to share and to be aware of, because that's how I think one shows empathy, by actually understanding what's entailed, understanding the motivations, the needs, vulnerabilities. And this is where our campaign for peer-to-peer is looking first for partners, is looking also to highlight these more personal stories, and to get a real sense of what's involved. Because if not, I think we remain somewhat removed from what's entailed. For me, the visit to the facility in Minneapolis, that was transformational. I honestly had no idea, Pat. I really didn't. And
really,
Pedro is a friend of 30 years. I think he wanted me to have that opportunity to visit. Brenda's made the opportunity to Camilo possible. They're trying to organize something over Easter at Rikers, and we're thinking of maybe making that a spring 2017 peer-to-peer project initiative that we go as a group with Brenda. One of the programs there entails a visit. So I think there are many ways one can find empathy and one can educate oneself. And for that, I think Prison Fellowship is a very, very helpful type of initiative, even for us as educators, because it gives us a real opportunity to learn. And I think it serves a tremendous public service that way. It's really amazing the more I hear about the work that's being done nationally, just how many are dedicated to this over, from what I understand, quite a long period of time now.
Yeah, my experience is the majority of the professionals I deal with in corrections, and certainly the people at my level, the ASCA people, the directors of the various departments, but the leaders in corrections, the vast majority completely embrace this concept. I know in people outside of our business do not look at us that way. They look at us people who are, salivating to flip the switch in the execution chamber or abuse people or whatever. That is not my experience. And I know that my experience counts in this. But people don't get that we really do believe that we want people to get out and stay out. We recognize people treated inhumanely become more inhumane. And we know that systems run properly create safer communities. But we don't particularly communicate it very well, apparently, to the majority of people in our country, because we're not looked at supporting those efforts. And yet most of us do.
I mean, do you think, Pat, that this is going to become harder in the years to come as the country now prepares to, shall we say, change administrations? It seems that this is a national concern. It's a concern one would think above any particular affiliation of any kind. That it's in a sense a national priority, and that it should be treated as such with respect. And I remember in the summer listening very carefully to both conventions, the speeches that were made at both conventions. And it seemed that it was cited, this idea of the need to reach out and to work with those who are involved in prison reform, because this is an important concern for the country. I would hope that would permeate in terms of the thinking more nationally, and even how we stand as a country internationally in this particular area. Because of course we have many things that we could share with the Europeans, they could share with us, with other countries as well. I'm just hoping that spirit isn't somehow derailed.
I share your concern. I will tell you that. I will tell you that this is one of the few issues over recent years that has really had bipartisan support, significant bipartisan support. And so I am going to be hopeful that those people who are well-versed and get it will continue to speak up, and I think they will. There's a huge cost to not continuing down the road with trying to get on. I mean, some of it is just a dollar cost to lock up so many people, and some of it is a human cost and the generational cost. You know, the cost, the likelihood of children to be incarcerated if one parent is incarcerated, exponentially higher than if not. And many, many people get that regardless of political affiliation. So I am hopeful that we don't go back to the soundbite days of lock them up and throw away the key. I'm concerned, but there are, you know, I was in Minneapolis this weekend, in fact, Colette. It was ASCA's all directors meeting. Leanne, of course, is the president.
Yeah, of course.
And Leanne spoke to the whole group about what she experienced in Europe and how, in many ways, embarrassing it is to see where our country is. And, you know, Leanne's a pretty conservative person and corrections leader, and yet she gets all that. And so that's why I say I am hopeful that we won't go backwards, but I'm not going to make any promises.
I mean, I think Leanne Birch is, of course, again, a leader in this field. She is presently very, very engaged as president. I think that she is really spearheading a number of initiatives coming out of this group. Is that not true, Pat? And
yes.
Maybe
yes,
you talk a little bit more for Camilo about the group and even your involvement in it, if that would be okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
The group is the Association of State Correctional Administrators, ASCA, and we are the association who represents, it's one of the smallest professional associations there is, represent the 50 state corrections directors, director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and there's 4 or 5 large city counties. So New York City, Rikers, LA County, Cook County in Chicago, Philadelphia prison system, and Washington, D.C. So that's it. It's like a 55, 56 member association. I am an associate member because I am retired but served a period of time that qualified me to still be involved. When I retired, I was the president of the association, the position that Leanne holds right now. And so this is a group who represents the voices of the leaders in corrections in the entire country, because between us, we run every state and federal system, and then the largest of the city-county system. So vast majority of incarcerated people fall under us. It is a group with a lot of voice. I will tell you one very positive thing that happened while we were there, Colette, is Leanne was informed that she's being reappointed by the new governor.
Wonderful. Well, now that's wonderful.
So, yes, so that was excellent news because you know how concerned she's been.
Absolutely.
So that did happen. I do remain very active with the association. As I said, I'm not an active member because I'm not an active director, but I actually chair a couple of groups within the association and attend their meetings as I did this weekend. So, but this is a group that's got some horsepower. Now, the majority, not all, depends on the structure in each system. The majority actually work directly for the governor in their state. I did. I was a member of the cabinet in Michigan. Most are. Some states have a commission, and the director is technically hired by the commission, you know, with, you know, approval from the governor's office. But you're looking at very high-level leadership and impact on correctional policy and discussions around the country.
Okay, well, first, we are certainly happy to hear about the reappointment for Leanne. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think we also would appreciate very much to be able to stay in touch with you, Pat, as we develop this campaign into the spring, as we see ways in which we first can work with Laura, possibly also with Brenda, and we would value your input and insights in terms of the initiatives that we might facilitate and ways we might be helpful. NYU P2P
Okay.
now, this will be our 4th term serving in the P2P program. We want to stay anchored in New York, but we want also to be thinking more nationally and certainly to scale up internationally. And I know that Reggie recommended I get in touch with Fred Hicks at the Viera Institute for a number of questions
Okay.
we're going to raise. And we're always going to stay open now to any suggestions that you or Reggie or Brenda may have. So please do keep us in mind, and we very much appreciate, again, the chance to stay in touch, keep you informed about what we're doing, and hopefully make some modest difference through our engagement in the work, the important work that you're doing. We appreciate very much the commitment and the dedication. All of the colleagues I met in Minneapolis, it was truly inspiring. I was truly humbled, and I was really very, very happy to be able to be there and to see just what's being done. So NYU, our team, we're here, we're ready, and if there's anything that we can do, you just feel free to call on us.
Well, I'm happy to stay in touch. Thank you. And you know how to reach me. One suggestion I would have, and think about this for the future, and this is something you could do through Leanne, especially now that we know she's reappointed and will be our president, is you may want to consider a presentation at some point at an ASCA meeting. So ASCA has 2 business meetings a year in conjunction with ACA. And we often have organizations who make presentations at those meetings. And this would be a very appropriate venue for something like this. You know, just from an education standpoint, Yale has been doing a number of projects and presenting at the business meetings for the last couple of years. They've been very active in the whole issue of segregation. So I would think about that. I know you stay in touch with Leanne, so that may be something to think about. I mean, she would have to be the one to approve it because she's the president. But I would say to keep that in mind, that so the next ACA meeting is in January, and it's in San Antonio, and then following that, they'll be together in August.
And where do you think the one in August might be?
Well, I actually know. Let me just look it up. I've got it on my calendar. Let's see. So August is in St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay, because the thing is that we'll be wrapping up this particular campaign this week in terms of the submission of materials. Of course, the campaign continues. We'll have a number of the team members making a connection between this semester and the next semester. We have one member who's going to also be participating very closely next term. So I'm thinking January is a bit tricky because we're in between. Whereas August, we would have the vantage point of sharing what's been done throughout the entire year. And I think we would have also the vantage point of having perhaps cooperated on that visit to Rikers, and then also seeing what might be done with the transformation project. There would be more to report, I think. And if Leanne were to agree to that, we would, I think, be delighted to have a little team that we could bring together. And yeah, I think it's a wonderful suggestion. I'm very happy to hear that Yale's been involved. I think it's important for the universities to be active and to be present at. This is not simply about an academic exercise, and it's not about scenarios. These are real life stories, and you're engaged with real life events. And as a university, I think there is a certain responsibility to be engaged in that way. So I'll keep that in mind. I am in touch with Leanne.
Great.
And I'll certainly keep you posted as well. Thank you so much for that suggestion. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, Pat. I know you're tremendously
happy to.
You travel all around, and it's a marvel when I think of what you're doing. So thank you so much, and we wish you a wonderful holiday season, and we look forward to being in touch.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the share here. And you see now you have Zoom in your arsenal. It's not hard to use. You see, it's very intuitive. So I hope we can be in touch again on Zoom, and I'm happy this worked out.
Me too, and I'll try and if we do this again, I'll try and get that sound thing worked out.
Thank you very much.
I'll get my son-in-law over here, who's younger and smarter, and get him to show me what I'm doing wrong.
We got to rely on the younger folks there. All right, dear. You have a lovely season. Pleasure to see you again.
Well, nice to meet you. Thank you, Carla.
Bye. Ciao.